Hello everyone, my name is Christine Butterbaugh. I am a Regional Director here at PeerStar. I oversee the operations of Cambria, Blair, Bedford, Somerset, Franklin, and Fulton counties, and I'm here today to talk to you about collaborative documentation. So by the end of this training, I hope that you'll be able to understand what collaborative documentation is, to understand the essential elements that needed for a note to be considered collaborative documentation, to be able to recognize when it is appropriate, when it's not appropriate to use collaborative documentation, and finally to be able to apply this information to your peer sessions while you're completing your contact notes. So first of all, what is collaborative documentation? It is a person-driven therapeutic approach in an interactive process that supports recovery-oriented services in which the documentation of the assessment, goal setting, and progress notes are integrated into the delivery of the service. The individual is face-to-face with the CPS and the peer is engaged in documentation process by providing input and perspective on their services and progress. So that's a mouthful. So let's break that down a little bit so that we can better understand what that means. So first of all, it's a person-driven therapeutic approach. So just like peer support, the peer is driving the car. They get to say in what is happening during the service and what is happening with the goals that they're working on. It's an interactive process. There's a back and forth between the CPS and peer. Documentation of the assessment, goal setting, and progress notes are integrated into the delivery of the service. And we are already seeing this when we complete our answer and IRP. The supervisor is asking questions, the CPS and the peer are providing the supervisor with information and feedback that the supervisor then uses to make the IRP. Face-to-face. So collaborative documentation is always done at face-to-face sessions. We cannot do it with phone sessions. And then finally, the peer is engaged in the documentation process by providing input and perspective. So the peer has a say in what goes into those notes. So there are some essential elements that is needed for a note to be considered collaborative documentation. First of all, again, it must be person-driven. The peer is driving the car. The peer gets a say in the direction of their services. The CPS and peer are both providing information for the documentation. It helps to assist the peer in becoming more engaged in the development of their goals. The conversation between the peer CPS helps to make sure that both parties are in the same page in regards to what was accomplished during that session and what your plan is to do next. We must inform the peer about what collaborative documentation is, and they get to decide whether or not they want to participate in the process. Collaborative documentation is always used as a benefit to the peer as part of their recovery service. And it must be clearly stated on the contact note that collaborative documentation was done. And finally, all CPSs must be trained in collaborative documentation before they are able to utilize it. So collaborative documentation is not the CPS completing the documentation at the end of the session. So what we have been doing up until this point is if we met the peer from 1 to 2 o'clock, we would end our session at 2 o'clock and then start the paperwork. Now we're going to start integrating that paperwork being done into the peer session with collaborative documentation. So we are no longer, so we're not billing for those extra 10 minutes. Those extra 10 minutes are getting integrated into the session itself. We cannot mandate a peer to complete collaborative documentation. If they choose not to be part of the documentation process, then they have that right to do so. We cannot use it for telephone conversations. We can only use it for face-to-face sessions. We also shouldn't utilize it when a peer is in crisis. Our focus should be on the peer and supporting them and not necessarily on our paperwork at that time. We also have to be careful of any type of HIPAA violations. So for example, if we're at McDonald's and if completing collaborative documentation means that you are going to have a HIPAA violation and someone's privacy is going to be violated, then we do not want to use collaborative documentation. So when should we be using collaborative documentation? Well, there's really two choices. The first one is that you can complete it during the course of the session while you're working on each goal. So if you're working on a goal that you're developing coping skills, you'll do that documentation right there, and then when you move on to the next goal, then you'll complete the documentation then. Or you can utilize it at the end of the session and use it, kind of as a review of what you did today. So today we talked about coping skills. We were able to list, 5 coping skills. And then the peer provides feedback into the accuracy of that documentation, whether or not you understood everything that they were trying to tell you, and they get a chance to kind of clarify any type of misunderstandings that are happening. So this is what the collaborative documentation is going to look like. So you're going to see collaborative document at the bottom of the little menu that you get on your contact note underneath transportation. And you're just going to tap on that. It is going to be a required field, so you do have to go in and answer the question whether or not you do collaborative documentation. You'll have some reminders there, and then you're going to decide, yes, we are going to complete collaborative documentation, or no, we did not. If you say no, then you're just going to complete and move on. If you say yes, it's going to pop up with another box, just like what happens whenever you choose a goal on the contact note. So then you have several choices there. The first choice is that the peer provided feedback on the progress made on their goals during today's session. Or second, you can choose the peer gave feedback about the goals they have and what they feel like is the next step needed for further progress. Or you can choose the third option, collaborative documentation was used to make sure the peer and the CPS are on the same page in regards to what they worked on today. The fourth option is that collaborative documentation was used to encourage the peer to participate in the development of their goals and the activities that they worked on. Or finally, you can choose collaborative documentation was used to make sure the documentation was accurate and of a higher quality. So this is what the collaborative documentation looks like. If you have any further questions, please contact me at my email address here, or you can also contact your own regional director for any further questions. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.